if I had to be home alone, I would go through great lengths to make sure that did not happen. Like really creative life engineering to make sure that I was never left alone. Because what happens if I panic or I snap? I have severe anxiety if I'm alone. Who's going to save me?
Monophobia is the belief that you cannot cope on your own.
I was so afraid to be alone that I literally deluded myself into thinking that my dog could dial 911.
I'd be like looking out for signs of potential rescue. Or maybe there's a farmer over there who would dial for help if needed.
So it's not a different fear. It's not its own fear. It's not, oh, I have this new thing I have to overcome. It does confuse people. That sometimes they get down on themselves and think, oh, I've developed yet another fear. Well, no, it's really kind of the same fear. Welcome to Disordered. This is episode 29 of the podcast. Today we're going to talk about the fear of being alone, otherwise known as monophobia. I am Drew Linsalata, one of the co-hosts of Disordered. I am a graduate student in clinical mental health counseling, getting ever closer to being a licensed therapist in the state of New York, here in the U.S. And I am joined by my co-host in the U.K.
I'm Joshua Fletcher, also known as Anxiety Josh on social media. I'm a qualified psychotherapist based in Manchester in the UK, who has previous experience of going through an anxiety disorder too. How you doing, Drew?
I'm good, man. What's happening?
Now I'm afraid to be alone, but it's great because we can talk to each other, so we're not alone.
We're not alone right now.
Monophobia often goes hand in hand with agoraphobia and panic disorder. What's your experience of it?
I had it. I had monophobia for sure. I didn't know it was called that. That was a term I learned later on. And that's not an official diagnosis, by the way. People think that that's not like a DSM-5 thing, but I was terrified to be alone for even a few minutes. Like being home. Home was my safe place, but as it turns out, it was only home with my safe people. If I had to be home alone, I would go through great lengths to make sure that did not happen. Like really creative life engineering to make sure that I was never left alone. Because I was afraid that what happens if I panic or I snap? I have severe anxiety if I'm alone. Who's going to save me? It sucked. Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think I wasn't too bad if I was at home on my own. It was when it was going to new places without a safe person for me. So it was like, well, just in case, and this word just in case, this phrase just in case. Just in case, I freak out or like you say, I need rescuing. So this gets to this stage where it's so frightening and uncomfortable. I need a safe person there with me. But I don't know why, because I mean, what are they going to do? But ultimately, monophobia is the belief that you cannot cope on your own.
Yeah. I mean, I did have those overriding, like, what if it's really a heart attack, or what if I'm having a stroke, or what if I am in fact going crazy? I need somebody to call help. Like I can't, to the point where, and this is a true story. At one point, I was so afraid to be alone that I literally kind of deluded myself into thinking that my dog could dial 911. And that might sound ridiculous. It is funny now. I will laugh at myself. But I tried so hard to believe, no joke, would put the cordless phone on the floor next to Lexi. She'd be maybe laying on the floor next to me, and I would put the phone down there. And I would try and envision scenarios where somehow I could, like, at the last second, activate the phone and somehow, I don't know, she would hit the button. That's how bad it was. That sounds insane, doesn't it? Yeah.
You've come a long way, Drew.
Dude, I'm telling you, that was not my proudest moment, but I can look back on it now educationally and laugh at it a little bit. But that's how scared I was to be alone.
Yeah, mine was, I used to do, and that's just something I hear from a lot of people, but I used to do this as well when I'm walking around or challenging myself, going to new places, particularly in nature or somewhere rural. I'd be like looking out for signs of potential rescue, a bit like your dog trying to dial 911. It was like, or maybe there's a farmer over there who would dial for help if needed. Maybe, and hopefully, frantically searching for maybe a couple of hikers that could save me just in case. And then as I got better with it, the little micro safety behaviors came in, like I wouldn't go anywhere without phone signal.
Oh yeah.
Just because that's a form of monophobia too. It's like, okay, I'm on my own and I'm doing well, but actually, if there's no phone signal, or I'm not going to get in this elevator without someone there,
Yeah.
um, you start to peel away the layers of it. But like I said, in its extreme form, like, yeah, I just cannot be left alone. And if you're going through that, it's very common. But ultimately, it's a fear of fear. I
Yeah.
don't believe I can. I believe that this will get to the point where I'll go crazy or lose control or have a heart attack. I mean, it doesn't happen,
Mm.
but obviously anxiety will convince you that you're the exception to the rule.
Yeah, and I think people tend to feel like, oh, I've developed now another thing, especially if you have an official diagnosis or multiple. I've been diagnosed with panic disorder and agoraphobia, or I've been diagnosed with multiple things, and now I also have this. This is a new thing. And it's interesting
Mm.
how like mine really expressed in that sort of textbook way. I don't want to be home alone or be left alone anywhere. And but the I can't do an exposure without my safe people. I can't face anxiety. Can't go too far away without my safe. It's the same thing. It's actually the same fear. Like you said, it all comes down to the idea that it will overwhelm me. I won't be able to handle it, and somebody will need to bail me out. So it's not a different fear.
Mhm.
It's not its own fear. It's not, oh, I have this new thing I have to overcome. And
Mm.
so I think it does confuse people. Sometimes they get down on themselves and think, oh, I've developed yet another fear. Well, no, it's really kind of the same fear.
No, I mean, my first ever book, Panicking About Panic, this is something I use for myself. I
Mm.
conjured this term called the anxiety umbrella, and
Yeah.
rather than using separate labels and diagnostics to make things sound more complex,
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of put it all under one umbrella. Like, "Oh, this is just anxiety." I know
Mm-hmm.
we had this conversation in an earlier episode. I actually like the phrase, "That's just anxiety. It's
Sure.
just decided that this is it."
Yep.
But also remembering that you have a phobia of how you feel, and it doesn't matter the scenario. When you have a phobia of anxiety, when you fear,
Right.
where you are is actually irrelevant. It's only through habit and repetition and
Mm-hmm.
it becoming a theme in itself that it has become a thing. And this applies, monophobia, agoraphobia,
Yeah.
panic, so whatever it is. Um, what's the way through it? What's the way out of it, Drew?
Well, curiously, now you could do monophobia exposures. That's fine. I did do that when I was,
Mm,
start to get committed to the recovery process. I knew that like, well, I'm going to have to practice staying home alone, and I would do that. And that was really difficult. But here's the thing that surprised me. I did not recognize this when I was doing that work. I learned it as I was doing the work. As I got better at all my other exposures, the monophobia got better too. So when I got better at moving through periods of very high anxiety and understanding I could handle it and it's going to be okay. I can deal with this. I can tolerate this. Somehow it was less scary to be home alone. So, that was interesting. It's like I didn't have to resolve monophobia specifically. I just had to get better. I had to get better at panicking is what had to happen. And as I
mm,
did, I started to learn like, oh, even if I do panic when I'm home alone, I can handle. I don't want to, but I can
mm.
handle it. So
Yeah,
yeah, panicking on the
yeah.
Long Island Expressway helped me stay home alone. Sounds
S-
ridiculous,
s-
but it was true.
yeah, no, it makes sense
Yeah.
because you're actually addressing what the fear is.
Yep.
If anything, for some people, being at home alone is more scary than driving on the Long Island Expressway, depending on how they've rationalized their fear.
Yeah.
Some people might think, well, actually, I could just, put my hazard lights on and someone can rescue me on the Long Island Expressway.
Right.
But actually, when I'm home alone, there's less access to. Whereas other people are like, yeah, I'll be bored at home alone, and driving would terrify me. And if you are someone with driving anxiety, go listen to the driving anxiety episode. It was a really good one.
Yep.
Really enjoyed that. It's very common. But yeah, monophobia is like, it. The way through it is to start to cultivate a belief that you can tolerate this.
Mm.
You've tolerated every anxiety, panic attack that's been thrown at you. You're not pushing it towards the edge. You're not asking for. I hear that loads. It's like, "Ah, yeah, but if I keep doing it, am I not just constantly pushing myself to breaking point?"
Right.
No, you're actually teaching the brain, look, I can tolerate these weird symptoms, these rapid what if thoughts,
Mm.
these horrible sensations. And actually, the more I do it, the less I become scared of it. I habituate to them,
Yeah.
but I also start to sow the seeds of a belief that actually, yeah, I can just tolerate this anxiety wherever I am.
Yep.
And it's a very liberating feeling when you realize, now don't get me wrong, whenever you're experiencing negative emotions, whether it's anxiety or sadness or feeling lonely or whatever, it is lovely to have someone around.
Oh, sure.
But when they become the crutch, a compulsive crutch, that's when you know actually, this feels like this isn't sustainable.
Yeah, that's the difference between, everybody might say, oh man, I really, geez, I sure could use a hug right now. Or I'm going to call a friend because I really need to talk this out. Or, hey, can we meet for coffee? Because I'm having a shitty day. Okay, that's fair. That's like an adaptive response that humans would engage in. It's the urgency. If you feel that you urgently need somebody around and you urgently cannot be alone because something horrible is going to happen if you are alone, that's where you cross into that other territory that we're always talking about. Well, have you like the breaking point? If I constantly push myself toward the breaking point, believe it or not, what you're really doing is you're pushing the breaking point further out, I think. So people would argue, well, there must be an actual breaking point. Well, okay, maybe if you want to make that argument that there is in fact a human breaking point, what you're essentially doing is learning that it is so far out there that you are likely never going to get to that. Right now, you think the breaking point is right up in your face, but that's not true. So you're really learning that, like, oh, my conception of my concept of breaking point is not accurate at all. Does that make sense? Yeah,
Definitely. Yeah, you're nowhere near your breaking point, and
no,
just because something feels like it,
right,
you know. Also, you, like other presentations, you're practicing being anxious.
sure,
For a lot of people with monophobia, they've built their life around trying to avoid all feelings of anxiety, all feelings of discomfort, because it is exhausting. It feels horrible. But when you realize that, hey, actually, I can tolerate this, you start to address the secondary fear that's added to the cycle. Like, okay, everyone experiences primary fear. I'm scared, I'm anxious. But it's the secondary fear for people with disordered anxiety that's the problem. It's like, okay, I'm anxious, but I need to work on why I'm anxious when I become anxious.
right,
And the perfect antidote to that is, well, it doesn't matter how anxious I get because I can tolerate it and it will pass.
yeah,
And it always does pass.
yeah. So monophobia is not, it's not a special fear. I know it feels like it is, and it feels like somehow you develop something else, and everything's getting worse, and I have to work on all these different things, but it's not really that way.
Yeah, I think it's important as a therapist as well. It can become symbolic and enmeshed in
Mm-hmm.
previous life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're someone who's grown up and maybe you've had scenarios and issues with maybe abandonment or being pushed away,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe you're someone who was never really taught to be independent and autonomous. Maybe someone constantly did things for you,
Mm-hmm.
or always maybe you're raised by an anxious parent who was constantly kind of with you or warning you of the dangers out there. That can cultivate a mindset going into adulthood that where we start to harbor these misbeliefs where actually, oh, I've never really learned that I can cope on my own.
Mm.
And that can play a part for some people. It didn't for me, and it doesn't sound like it did for you, Drew,
No.
but I've heard it a lot in here. Um, but again, the end result's the same.
Right.
Doing exposures to prove to yourself that you can do that and to challenge these misbeliefs.
And I think that's a crappy deal sometimes. And so I love that you brought that up because we'll take a little swipe at insta therapy or pop psychology for a minute here. What, me take a swipe? When does that ever happen?
I know. Yeah.
I know, never, right? But like one of the things that became super popular, I'm not saying it's wrong. I know it's a theoretical orientation, that anxious at the attachment styles thing. And so a lot of people in our community started hearing insta therapy posts a lot about anxious attachment and anxious attachment. And that my monophobia must be my anxious attachment. Well, what Josh is saying is, yeah, if you have an anxious attachment style or you have abandonment issues, it probably makes you more vulnerable to develop monophobic presentation if you develop an anxiety disorder. But that's because you may see yourself as incapable of that. I go to somebody on everything, and why wouldn't I go to somebody on this? I need somebody around for this. So it makes you more vulnerable, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have. It's not automatic. Oh, this means
Yeah.
I have to work on my anxious attachment. Well, maybe, but that's not necessarily true in every case of monophobia in panic disorder and agoraphobia. I think it's important to say that.
Definitely.
Yeah,
One does not equate to the other, but
correct.
it can be shaped by it, can be informed by that, particularly when your rational brain
Yep,
in states of anxiety is trying to work out, well, why do we feel so anxious?
right.
And at some point it'll be like, well, maybe because you're on your own, maybe something awful's going to happen and you're on your own, and this may dredge up memories and maybe even old safety behaviors
Hmm,
that you did for emotional problems outside of a disordered
sure.
anxiety presentation might
Yeah,
come up to.
it's a good
And
point.
that's super important. The whys and stuff are, they can be important, but the solution usually isn't. It's like, your brain is very neuroplastic. It's
Hmm.
very um, open to rewiring and habituating to a new scenario. And so, yeah, monophobia is one of them that you can do pretty quickly as well when you start to realize, actually, hold on, I'm
I can do
more
this.
capable.
Yeah.
Um, People with monophobia, agoraphobia, will usually quite naturally kind of have low self-esteem
Mm,
because it feels like their autonomy and independence has become under attack. Sometimes the lack of self-esteem can become before the presentation as well. Maybe
mm,
we've just struggled with self-esteem a bit. We don't have that belief in ourselves that we can do it, but just know that you can. Everyone can. They are capable. It's a bit different if you are someone who is living with a disability,
oh, sure.
or someone where you actually need care.
Mm,
That's completely fine. I wouldn't say that's monophobia as such. It can happen,
mm,
but talking in general, when you're living day to day, you've got an open plan calendar, and then you realize, you look at that and go, oh no, I can't do that without someone,
yeah.
because I might get scared.
Yeah, I think this is one of those, and if there is that, other factor, maybe past experience or whatever, your upbringing, it does matter. Like you were saying, but this is where the crappy deal comes in. I always talk about how we get a crappy deal on anxiety disorders. Maybe your past experiences did not provide you the optimal opportunities to find your self-efficacy, right, and understand that you are capable. Well, here's
Mm.
one. Here's the opportunity now. This is not the opportunity that anybody wants to have to learn that they're capable. It sure would be much nicer if we learned that on the playground when we were 6 years old through supportive caregivers. But if you didn't, this is where you can learn it. So look at it that way also. It's not a pleasant way to learn it, but this experience can help you overcome that self-esteem thing, that self-efficacy problem. It's just not
Yeah,
optimal.
yeah,
Don't want anybody
definitely,
to have to do that, but this can be a positive in the end.
definitely.
Yeah, yeah,
When we strip it back to basics, we always start with our good friend, the amygdala. Amygdala.
there you go.
It starts with the amygdala. The amygdala has been temporarily conditioned
Hmm.
to warn you that if there's any opportunity where you are alone, you will be unsafe.
Yeah,
And so it's doing its job. So if you're like, oh, my partner is going away for work for 2 days and I'm going to be on my own, and that fills you with that whoosh sensation, like, oh gosh, and
mm,
you feel sick in your stomach and all that. That's the amygdala doing its job. It's signaling to the brain
mm,
and the body, prepare for threat, because I've been conditioned to do this temporarily.
yeah,
But as soon as you feel that whoosh, that's step one in an opportunity to rewire it, because you can only rewire the amygdala when it's activated. So
that's such a raw deal.
it is. It's a
It's a
raw deal, but it
terrible
makes
deal that we have.
sense.
You're right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it does make sense. It's horrible, but it does make sense. It's almost like if it screams loud enough, the amygdala will open its mouth, and then we can,
Like
you know,
force
put our
feeding.
hand in
Yeah,
and rewire it. That's what we got to do.
sure.
Uh, Whereas don't a lot of people with monophobia have had the wrong approach.
Mm,
It's what can I do to never open the amygdala up, to never do that, to
yeah.
never feel scared, and they've built a life full of avoidance and compulsions.
Mm,
And have you noticed? I mean, you could be there for years, just going round and round and round, because the amygdala thinks it's being helpful. This is the chance to say, actually, no, it's time
mhm,
for me to get better at leaning into uncertainty,
mhm.
I'm practicing being anxious and going with my rational brain.
And I think in that situation, and this is a thing I'm sure you hear too, I hear it all the time, like exactly the scenario you described. Like, oh, my
Mm.
safe person is scheduled to travel. This was a big deal when the pandemic sort of ended and everybody went back to work and started traveling again. It was, oh, I had a year and a half of my safe person always with me, and now that person is going back to work, or they're
Mm.
traveling again, and I'm freaking out because they leave next week. What can I do? Well, the first step would be like just recognize, acknowledge, like, of course I'm going to be afraid right now. Like, instead
Mm.
of thinking I have to find a way to not be afraid, like, no, of course I'm going to be afraid right now. That's to be expected in my situation.
That's step one.
Yeah, step one, like, yes, of course I'm afraid. And instead of like, well, how can I not be afraid that they're leaving? You're going to be afraid. This is an opportunity to start to work through that, as opposed to trying to
Yeah.
fix that. Yeah, be nice to yourself instead of like, I have to stop this. This is not right. It shouldn't happen. Well, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We heard, I like that. It's not quite monophobia, but when we were listening to the submitted voice notes that we get,
Mm.
if you want to submit a voice note to us, just log on to disordered.fm. You can also ask a question if you'd like. But I listened to this one this morning and I thought it'd be nice to play today because we like to celebrate the Did It Anyways on this show.
That was nice.
Let's hear this
Let's
one,
hear it.
and just as an example of stepping into uncertainty.
Yeah, let's do it. Here we go.
Hey guys, I have a double did it anyway for you today. How about that? So, for my entire life, I've had extreme health anxiety. And I've been doing my exposures these last couple of months and wanted to use my doctor's appointment today as an opportunity to practice some of that exposure work. So, yes, I was anxious. Yes, I was nervous. Yes, my blood pressure was a little bit higher than it normally would have been, but I was able to go to the appointment. I had a great conversation with my doctor. And when I left the office, I thought to myself, all right, that is a did it anyway. But then when I got home, I realized that I was starting to feel some old compulsions come back. Like maybe I'll check my blood pressure one more time now that I'm home, or maybe I'll go on Google to find out more about this test that my doctor wanted me to do. And I actually thought to myself, wait a minute, even though I'm not at the office anymore, some of that anxiety has followed me home. It didn't just go away when I walked away, but I've never been able to recognize that before. So I did it anyway again. I had some lunch, I went for a walk, I watched stupid real estate videos on YouTube, and it was a really, really important moment for me in my anxiety recovery because it helped me to kind of be able to crystallize and recognize exactly how sneaky that anxiety can be and what it feels like for me to make decisions under the gun of anxiety rather than with my rational mind. So thank you both for everything you do for your community and have a great weekend.
That was great.
Superb. Do you know what I liked about that is that you could have replaced everything you did
Yep.
with what we're talking about today.
That's
How
exactly right.
how do we go about doing like that?
Well, I think, this person, you would use the concept that they applied, which is, oh, I recognize what this is, and I'm going to do something different than I usually do. So my favorite part of this was I started to want to check my blood pressure again and go through those old compulsions. And I said, wait a minute, I know what this is. I'm going to do something different. Instead, I'm going to watch real estate videos and I'm going to engage with the things that are important in my life or I would like to be engaged with. And the same thing holds true with monophobia. I can sit and wring my hands and play through scenarios of disaster, alone disaster in my head, or I can recognize and acknowledge that I'm going to be afraid because this is challenging for me. And I'm going to try and take that fear with me and engage in the things that I would prefer to engage in and exercise my tolerance muscles a little bit. Yeah, I could apply the same exact thing.
It's that and that metacognitive awareness of
Yeah.
I'm watching myself
Yep.
reenact old compulsions here and
Correct.
old habits. And this is super important. If you're struggling with monophobia, I mean, let's list some of the old habits that people with monophobia would do. So let's say you're in a similar situation, you're at home,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you've done an exposure in the morning and you've come home and you realize, actually, I'm starting to do it again. So I'm clock watching. I'm waiting for the time my children or
Yeah.
my partner gets home or my friend comes around for coffee.
Yep.
Maybe I'm, purposely hanging about in the garden so my neighbors know that I'm there. Maybe I'm looking at my calendar to plan when I'm not going to be alone. Maybe I'm Google searching again for miracle cures about how to overcome monophobia and stuff. Maybe that's become a habit. And actually, why I loved this Did It Anyway, and well done, is no, I noticed at the point where I needed to change that.
Yeah.
And if you note, and you could tell by the end of the voice note, actually, his anxiety began to dissipate.
Yeah, I mean, because you're learning at that point in that micro experience, if you will, like, oh, minute by minute, look at this, I'm okay, I'm doing it, and you're taking that lesson minute by minute. For me, I could tell you that some of those compulsions would have been, again, check to see if the neighbors are around, text somebody. That is a huge one for people with monophobia. Like they
Or
even
just call someone
call
for an inane
someone.
chat.
That's exactly right. I'm going to call somebody. I mean, I know people that literally make sure that they have people in, and we can do that now because of the internet. I have people in time zones all over the world to make sure that any given time I can talk to somebody. Because, and it's literally been explained, because I know that even though I'm in New York and that person is in Manchester, I could text Josh and he could call the authorities for me here in New York, so there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
I know I can tell you also that I did, and I was agoraphobic, but I would drive to where a safe person was to be and sit in the parking lot. I did that several times. Wow. This is a guy who didn't want to get in the car, but the fear of being alone in that moment would override the fear of the driving. I couldn't go far, but I would go a mile down the road and go sit in a parking lot.
Wow.
Yeah, I did a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Some
wow.
embarrassing in retrospect, but
I wouldn't say that's embarrassing. I think that's just an honest and raw account of what it can be like and how scary fear can be. Because we often sit here and refer to as authorities on the subject, but it's because of times like that. And I've been in very vulnerable situations like that too. And I just want to extend an appreciation to you, Drew, for sharing that with me.
Oh, thanks, man.
Without the caveat of a joke.
Yeah, it wasn't. I mean,
we're being sincere here, guys.
Yeah, I know.
Feels awful.
I know. We get someone tell a joke,
just
please.
Break it up a little bit.
There you go. Let's have the screaming eagle. We need it. Let's talk for a couple of minutes about, because people will invariably ask this, and sometimes I think we miss this. I get that all the time. Well, my partner is going away, my safe person is going away, or I live only I lived a quarter mile from my mom, she's my safe person, and this is okay. They're going on vacation, and I know she won't be there. What do I do? What can I do? And
what would non-anxious you do?
There you go. And I
listen to that episode. It's a cracking one.
Yeah, one of the things is, first of all, the expectations matter. And this applies not just to monophobia, but any unexpected exposure or challenge that life is forcing on you. The expectation really matters. What can I do? And a lot of times that person is asking, give me a thing I can do so that I won't be afraid when she leaves, or that I won't be afraid now. Well, again, start from the expectation, no, I'm going to be afraid. This is challenging for me. But one of the things that you could do is start practicing now. What do you do when your mom ducks out to the shops? Do you go with her? Well, then this time don't. So however, use the time that you have to practice as much as you can. I think that's to me, that's a big thing. And guess what? You don't even have to practice monophobic exposures. If you're going to be alone, for a couple of days because you're safe, people are going on vacation. What else triggers you? Go start practicing those things too. Yeah.
And practice living how you want to live.
Yep.
Behave how you want to feel.
Yep.
Some people become so enveloped in pouring their energy into creating contingencies that they forget actually what would they be doing. And I do want to hark back to the Do What Non-Anxious You Would Do episode, because a lot of people often feel stuck in the headlights a bit. Like, okay, I'm doing my exposures, but what do I do now? I'm on my own. Well, you're going to have to discover that. Because for some people, they're like, I've kind of forgot. I don't know what to do. What I would say is don't do anxious compulsions to try and make the feeling go away, but also don't just sit and stare at your anxiety. You don't have to sit there and, and we spoke about that early on about, do I sit with it? No, what? Have a think about what non-anxious you would be doing.
Right.
Actually, you know what? There's a recipe I've wanted to make for a long time. Actually, you know what? There's a new market stall down in town I might go and check out on my own.
Yeah.
Because I think in an ideal universe, that's what I would do. And I'm going to go and do that whilst being anxious, rather than just sitting there and letting the feelings acutely hit you. I didn't actually do that. I was like, no, this is a behavior and attention problem. and I used to almost simulate actually what I would be doing at home whilst feeling anxious. And I remember particularly at one time where I think I was just, maybe I'd watch a movie or something, and about halfway through the movie, I found I was engaged in the movie. I was like, oh, my anxiety's actually come down a bit.
Imagine that.
Otherwise, I'd be pacing. I used to pace.
Mhm.
I used to scrunch my hands. I used to a clock watch. I used to be like, has it gone yet? I'm waiting for the miracle. Like, I'm doing my exposure. Is it finished yet?
Mhm.
It's like, no, actually, no, I need to look at my behavior. What am I doing here? And it's so important to teach the amygdala, look, I can function. I can be a human here.
Yeah, that's true. And I think duration, monophobia is an interesting thing too, because one of the specifics that comes along with that is duration. So if you're going to do, say, a driving exposure because you're agoraphobic, that driving exposure is planned and it generally has a known duration. I'm going to drive 3 miles today or for an hour, whatever it is. Whereas monophobia is, it doesn't have a duration unless you know, oh yeah, my partner's going to be back in 10 minutes. They just ran out for something. They had to put gas in the car. Okay, cool. But at some point, those things get longer and longer, and the monophobic person can't control that. So, oh no, it was 5. I'm okay if they're gone for 5 minutes, but they're going to be gone overnight. And I think there's no way I could tolerate it for that long. So they start to, they think about it as, I can be alone for 10 minutes, but I can't be alone for 2 hours. Well, why? Like, what makes it, that's too long. My tolerance will break down and I'll melt, or, you know.
I remember some of the monophobia exposures I did with clients in here, going out into Manchester, going out into town to go shopping. And I'd be and we chose shopping because it'd be like, well, this is kind of a normal stuff thing to do, and we'll go shopping, feeling anxious. And then we do things like, and I recommend doing this yourself. If you are someone who relies on a safe person, go shopping, but why don't you go into a shop on your own and then meet the safe person outside again in 5 minutes?
Sure.
You don't need to keep peering over your shoulder or whatever. Actually, again, simulate. You probably look at clothes. You do all these. You're doing this for future you, and we build that up. Like, okay, let's go to a big shopping mall and meet back at the entrance in 1 hour.
Yeah.
So there's 1 hour of monophobia, without my safe person. A monophobia exposure without my safe person.
Yeah.
And then you build it up and up until, the ultimate exposure, which that I set for my clients in the long term is, I think I mentioned this in a previous episode, get someone to drop you off at the bottom of this hill, no phone, no magic water, no nothing, and walk to the top of the hill and meet them again in an hour. And they're like, oh my God, why would you do that? Because walking up the hill increases your heart rate.
Yep.
You might feel a bit out of breath. You're going to be on your own. You're going to do all these things. But ultimately, is walking up a small hill a dangerous thing? No. But it's the perfect exposure because you're getting the credit for it. Your brain's going, oh my God, there's no contingencies here. And it rewires. And every single time, with every client and person I've worked with, they get to the top of the hill, their anticipatory anxiety has predicted they'd be freaking out, rolling around, calling for a helicopter to save them. Actually, when they get to the top of the hill, they're like, wow, this is quite liberating. I might hang out here for a bit.
I did it. And that's such a great, did it anyway. And that is such a great monophobic exposure. You're doing the agoraphobia exposure, you're doing the panic symptoms exposure. And if you're afraid to be home alone, that exposure is a great home alone exposure.
Yes.
It's not a home alone exposure, but you are building your sense of competence that, oh, look, I can handle it. If I have these sensations, I can handle this. So if I can handle it at the top of a hill, maybe I can handle it at home too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the brain does that because, it's one fear, like Drew did on one of his episodes on The Anxious Truth. It's all one fear. Don't get me wrong. I mean, like we mentioned before, there's other fears as well. I mean, again, symbolically, if you're someone who doesn't have good associations with being on your own as well, outside of anxiety and fear, of course, but challenge that too.
Yeah.
You can lump all them in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really empowering. Look, I did something difficult on my own.
And I think with monophobia, for me, it was very important. I think it's important for most people. If you're going to do those monophobic exposures and practice being alone, the narrative, I made it, has to change to I did it, because otherwise you do start to get trapped in, I made that 10 minutes. I made it. Thank God
That's
that
super
person came
important.
home at 11 minutes, because there was no way I made the 10 minutes. No, you did the 10 minutes, because you really have to understand that the difference, what was the difference between you in the 8th minute or in the 138th minute? There's no difference. You're still as capable as you always were. So,
yeah, the semantics are really important. I'm glad you
did
said
it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forced myself and I made it.
Right.
How about I encouraged myself and I did it?
I did it. Right. And that leaves you open to the possibility that if you can do 10 minutes alone, you could do an hour alone. If you can do an hour, you could do overnight. So you got to be open to that possibility. Should we go on
I have a fear of celebrating people's did it anyway successes. So I'm going to do an exposure now.
Sure.
Drew, can you read? Have you got any did it anyway?
I do. This is an email, did it anyway. Again, if you go to disorder.fm, you can send us an email message or a voicemail message, ask a question, do a did it anyway. This is a did it anyway. I won't say the person's name. It came in a little while ago, but it's a really good one. Just sharing a did it anyway. I have sleep anxiety, which was, if you're listening to this, was last week's episode. I have sleep anxiety, and I was recently invited to a company golf tournament. I was worried that if I didn't sleep well, I would make a fool of myself. I ended up not sleeping well, but I went anyway, and I had a great time. Thank you for your show. I usually find a nugget in each episode that helps. Well,
I love that.
Yeah, short and sweet.
Maybe that's your kind of superstition for your golf game as well. You hit a good round, you're like, I'm never going to sleep for.
I got to stay up all night before every golf game.
Yeah. Sleep makes my golf game worse.
But I love that. I was worried, and I went anyway. This person rolled the dice, and as it turns out, hey, I was all right.
I love how that follows on from our sleep thing episode. Challenging all the, if I don't sleep, the world falls apart. Actually, no, you ended up just having fun.
Imagine that.
That anticipatory anxiety can be tricky.
I could nail this also to today's episode. So this person may have been tired, not optimal, maybe dragging sometimes, but still handled it and had moments where they did okay, had a great time. So, he's not describing necessarily, it was just 8 hours of nirvana on the golf course. There may have been moments where he sagged a little bit, but okay. And the same would hold true with monophobia. Like, oh, look, I got caught up in this movie for 10 minutes. Well, that's a win. Celebrate that. And then I was anxious for 20 minutes. Okay, that's okay. It's part of this process. So, don't declare disaster because of the saggy parts. Look at the parts where you're buoyed a little bit.
Excellent.
Saggy parts. That's
Did
not
you say buoyed?
Buoyed. I said buoyed. That's right.
Isn't it buoyed?
Oh, buoyed. Oh, no, this is where we have
say that, buoyed.
Buoyed. It's buoyed. Yeah, that's the most
American thing I've ever heard. I've never even heard that. It's hilarious.
Josh is so obsessed with his screaming eagle.
I've calmed down from the soundboard from Attenborough last week. Apologies about that. I've calmed it down. Just the eagle today.
I haven't edited that episode yet. I'm leaving them all in because they were good.
Yeah, there were some odd ones. Some of that. Cool. Anyway,
should we do
we have any questions from the community?
We did. We had a question came in. This is a really great question. Again, I won't say the person's name. So this person wrote, I have a question about safety behaviors. I have some micro safety behaviors that I feel I need to drop, but I'm confused because they're also things that I do that keep me well. So for example, if I have a big meeting coming up, I won't eat sugar the day before, as that makes me feel rubbish, clearly a Brit, and increases my anxiety. But it's also something that I choose to do to stay well and look after my health. I need advice on what to do. How do I drop it? How do you drop a safety behavior that is also something you do just to stay well? It's a great question, I think. What do you think?
What do they mean by stay well? I mean, what's going to stop you from, if you don't have sugar? Okay. On the big scale of thing, maybe sugar consumption isn't great.
Sure.
But what's that going to do in the short term with doing a meeting? For me, I'm on the opposite. I'm like, I've got Mars bars. I need this short term energy here because I've got to go and get through this.
Sure.
It sounds to me like, and already, by the way, great question, because you already identified that it's a micro avoidance.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
I'd say, well, what happens when you don't do that? Because your fear is what happens when I don't. And the sugar or the lack of sugar intake is actually getting the credit. I only got through that because I chose not to do that. Now, don't get me wrong. Some people who don't struggle with disordered anxiety may choose to do that. Actually, yeah, I'm not going to have a sugary drink because I don't want to have sugar crash halfway through and be tired
Sure.
and sluggish or whatever. But if you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to bet that actually, no, I'm afraid I might become too anxious, or the sugar might make me feel more jittery or whatever. In that case, I'd be like, no, you can do it.
Yeah.
You could even replace that question with caffeine. I do talks now. It was really nice. I'd avoid coffee for years, and when I do talks and things now for businesses and organizations or mental health days or whatever, I'll have a coffee before I go on, and I feel all jittery and and I quite like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you've kind of answered your own question there by way of actually labeling it as a micro avoidance.
Yeah.
So maybe I would just play around with that for a bit. What happens if you do? If you drop a Haribo a few minutes beforehand?
Gummy bears.
Obviously, if you're diabetic or anything like that,
don't do that.
That's different.
Right.
Or do it. If you've got a low blood sugar,
Sure.
you need sugar.
Sure.
Have sugar. Because I know a lot of people with diabetes, they need a slightly higher blood sugar to get through certain things.
Yep.
Like exercise and stress. But yeah, in general, if you're going to do that, actually go towards what you're avoiding.
Look for rigidity, I think. One of the hallmarks of recovery is the increase in psychological flexibility. And what I hear here is rigidity. So like, no, I can't eat sugar because eliminating sugar keeps me well. That's an absolute statement in a way. Now, again, like Josh said, if you do have a medical condition that's exacerbated by sugar, you have to take care of that. But the rigidity there, I would say, needs to be challenged. What would happen if you don't have to do it before your next huge business presentation, but, have a little extra, have some sugar today and be unwell, air quotes, tomorrow, and see what happens when you're unwell tomorrow. I'm not saying that would be a thing you would choose for the rest of your life, but I think that flexibility that says, oh, it's somebody, what happens if it's your child's birthday and there's birthday cake and you want to have some, but I can't because then I'll be unwell. That's rigidity. So,
yeah. And I think to add to that, we can do an episode on this. When anxiety borrows from wellness culture to get you to do compulsions and avoidance. Oh, that's one of my favorites. Oh, can we write that one down?
It's funny. We have been I just wrote it down in the notes we have been hanging on to those for a while since we started this podcast.
Yeah.
The wellness community, that stuff. That's like, well, we probably shouldn't start with that.
Well, but it's true. That's true. Your anxiety persuading you to avoid. But it's true. Sugar's bad for you. Why would you do that? Well, yeah, okay. But also, we do many things that are bad for us, But this is why I always go by, do what non-anxious you would do. I like a beer on a Friday night. Beer isn't good for you. Guess what? I like it. It's all right. That's what I do.
We are also eliminating, in a way, we're forgetting the fact that I'm not saying that you should soak yourself in beer or drown yourself in sugar, clearly. However, we're also ignoring the fact that our bodies are literally designed to process those things. So, I won't eat any sugar, so I won't eat a candy bar. Fine, fair enough. But I will eat a banana, and that's fine. I like bananas. And that's fructose. That's better. That's a complex sugar. Yeah, but my body's going to turn it into sucrose anyway. So it doesn't matter. Like we are literally doing that. So we're forgetting that. I don't want to get into that argument, but
we'll save that rant.
Yeah, we're forgetting.
Yeah. Well, let's do a ranty episode. That'd be nice. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the recent reviews on Spotify and Apple. And some people left them directly on the website as well. We really appreciate the reviews. We get more organic reach and reach other anxious people with the Spotify and Apple reviews. So if you do have a moment, we really appreciate your time just to leave something, whether it's like these two are idiots, they don't know what they're talking about, or actually, it's really kind of helped me. Keep the voice notes coming in, keep the messages coming in on disordered.fm. Go find us on social media, Anxiety Josh and The Anxious Truth. And we're going to start sending out new. Is that you again?
That's me again. I thought I had them
wouldn't be a
all
disordered
turned off.
Episode without Drew's World of Warcraft account going off in the background.
It's my reminder that I'm busy. How's that?
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in, guys, and
we'll see you
have
next
a nice
time.
rest of your week.
Take care. Hey, it's Drew. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Disordered. Josh and I both hope that you're finding it helpful in some way. For more information about Josh or me or the Disordered podcast, find us on the web at disordered.fm. That's disordered.fm. Pop on over and find links to our social media platforms. Join our mailing list so we can let you know when new podcast episodes are available. And we'll send you easy ways to ask us questions and share your wins, so we can answer questions on the air and share your successes with the community. And if you're listening to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any platform that lets you rate or review, do us a favor and leave us a 5-star rating and maybe write a review if you're digging disordered. It really helps us out and we appreciate that. Thanks again for coming by, and we'll see you in the next episode.